Picture this. It's the 1970s. The new wave science fiction movement of the 60s has made its splash, and the ripples are still transforming science fiction as a genre. By now, the waves have quieted. Writers who want to do new things, experimental things, are doing them. Writers who want to say new things, difficult things, outrageous things, are saying them. Many of these new voices are finding new audiences. Young people, particularly, are finding new subjective writers appealing. College bookstores report that science fiction as a whole is selling remarkably well, but some speculative and introspective science fiction is selling even better. The reverse is true in the general market, where the more traditional analog is by far the best-selling magazine. And DAW Books, published by Donald A. Wollheim, stressing traditional science fiction stories and covers, are a surprising sales phenomenon. That is a quote from James Gunn's Alternate Worlds, an illustrated history of science fiction. When I first started collecting vintage science fiction, almost immediately there was a livery that stood out. The authors were top-notch, the covers eye-catching, top quality and memorable, but perhaps most alluring was the bold, perhaps questionable decision to paint every spine in this in-your-face French's mustard yellow. Hello everybody, Jake here, and welcome to another installment of Deep Dives and Spotlights, where today we take a look into the history of DAW Books. Throughout the 50s and 60s, many publishers offered science fiction, though Ace and Ballantine were clearly the top dogs, but even they were varied. They published everything from hard-boiled detective to gothics to westerns. But then in 1971, a new publisher entered the market, doing something completely unheard of and never before done: printing just speculative fiction. I mean, it says so right there in the title. DAW equals SF. Now, I've not been able to find a definitive statement as to why they went with yellow, but it's plainly obvious to me DAW Books were impossible to ignore. It's not just the color either, but the covers were equally vibrant, trading realism and surrealism for an unapologetically comic style. DAW covers harken back to the pulps, but elevated, modernized. Many old-school artists like Jack Gahn, Josh Kirby, and Kelly Freas jump over to DAW, but also showcase new talent, such as Carol Thole, Don Mites, Ken Kelly, Boris Vallejo, Gino Diachilli, and Michael Whalen. It seriously never fails that when I'm out reading a DAW yellow spine in public, someone will stop and ask me, "What are you reading?" But before we go any further, we need to talk about the DAW himself. Donald Allen Wollheim was born in New York City in 1914. A lifelong fan of speculative fiction, he wanted to be a writer. His first short story was published in 1934 in Wonder Stories, but editor Hugo Gernsback did not pay him. This happened several more times, and while Wollheim continued to write well into the 60s, 18 SF novels in total, it was no longer his focus. He realized that his gift was in editing. He worked for multiple magazines, and in 1943 he edited the first ever mass-market science fiction anthology, Pocket Book of Science Fiction. This was also the first book to have science fiction in the title. Wollheim got a job at Avon and was the founding member of the Futurians, where he met his future wife, Elise Balter. Wollheim hated working for Avon, but had made a name for himself there, and in 1952 he accepted a job with Ace Books, where he would stay for 20 years. He started Ace's science fiction line, created the Ace Doubles, and was instrumental in bringing Edgar Rice Burroughs' work back into the light. His time at Ace might be most well known for the Tolkien controversy, the pirated, unauthorized paperback printings of The Lord of the Rings. Now that is a very interesting story as well, but perhaps for another video. A.A. Wynn, the founder and main man over at Ace, died, leaving the company in disarray, and soon it began to spiral the drain. Wollheim jumped ship with his wife Elise and started DAW Books. The name DAW are Wollheim's initials. I'm embarrassed that I didn't know that until like 5 minutes ago. Something else that was unknown up until a few years ago was that Wollheim was a transvestite. I know the modern day terminology would probably be transgender, so I'm not intentionally being derogatory in saying transvestite or crossdresser. This is just how Wollheim and others referred to themselves during this era. Betsy Wollheim, Donald's daughter, revealed all of this in the 2022 documentary, Casa Susanna.
My father said he was going to have a dress rehearsal because he was going to dress up as his sister for Halloween the next day. So I was 12. And my father was in the bathroom for 5 hours. And even At 12, I realized that wasn't usual for somebody just getting ready for a Halloween party. And when he came out, I was really quite frightened because he looked very ghoulish to me. He had shaved his arms, his legs, his chest. He had taped up his face. I ran into my bedroom and slammed the door because I was like momentarily shocked. I knew pretty immediately that he was really into this. I just didn't know the extent.
Donald A. Wollheim was a middling writer, self-admittedly, but he shined as an editor and publisher. He has been called a very difficult man, and it was not uncommon to hear, "I love the man, but I do not like him." However, this critical nature is what made him such an exceptional editor. He died in 1990 at the age of 76. Frederick Pohl called him a founder of science fiction as we know it, and fellow author and editor Robert Silverberg called him seriously underrated and the most significant figure in American SF publishing. In 2002, he was posthumously inducted into the Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame. Andre Norton, whom had her Witch World books published in Ace by Wollheim, followed him over to DAW and started it all off with DAW #1, Spell of the Witch World. Despite Wollheim not being a fan of fantasy, perhaps his Lord of the Rings experience influenced that opinion, DAW was majorly responsible for starting fantasy's resurgence during the 70s and 80s. In fact, even from year one, there were multiple fantasy titles, not just science fiction. DAW also brought back planetary romance, or a phrase that Wollheim coined, sword and planet, something that every other publisher wouldn't touch because they thought it too dated. Many authors that Wollheim worked with at Ace followed him to DAW, including Philip K. Dick, John Brunner, Gordon R. Dixon, Jack Vance, A.E. Van Vogt, and a host of others. DAW also ushered in a new wave of authors, introducing us to Tanith Lee, Michael Shea, C.J. Cherry, Marion Zimmer Bradley, Michael Moorcock, Roger Zelazny, and many, many more. Each DAW book is numbered, except for those that weren't. There were quite a few errors, duplicates, and just skipped numbers that I'm sure frustrate collectors. DAW also made anthologies. The annual World's Best SF started that first year. 1974 marked the start of Year's Best Horror Stories, edited by Carl Edward Wagner, and Year's Best Fantasy, edited by Lynn Carter in 1975. The DAW Science Fiction Reader was also a very special anthology for book number 200. Then in 1984, DAW's fifth printing of Bradley's Hunters of the Red Moon saw a disturbing change. The yellow spine was gone. The yellow DAW box stayed for a few books, and a few more yellow spines came out around this time, but Marion Zimmer Bradley's Sword and Sorceress marked the final yellow spine. It was number 578. Well, what about the contents? Whereas Ace books were heavily edited, especially the Ace doubles, DAW let the authors shine. They were allowed to take risks, push the word count, and explore the taboo. Here's a good example. New American Library, DAW's distributor during this time, refused to print Thomas Burnett Swan's How Are the Mighty Fallen due to homosexual content. Instead of folding, Wollheim went to bat for Swan, and eventually NA Library backed off. Despite the freedom authors enjoyed, Wollheim was a sharp editor and a sharper publisher. There was an expectation of quality, both in story and composition. This benefits the reader greatly. DAW also focused on series such as Cherry's Morgaine, Moorcock's Elric, E.C. Tubbs' Cap Kennedy, Bradley's Darkover, Philip Jose Farmer's Opar, Charles Sanders' Imaro, and over 35 volumes of Scorpio Antares by Dre Prescott, a pen name for Kenneth Bulmer. And speaking of Cherry, her classic Down Below Station was the first DAW book to win a Hugo, but it certainly was not the last. DAW books seemed unstoppable, but all good things must come to an end. In 1985, towards the end of his life, Donald's daughter, Betsy Wollheim, took over the company. Now, I can't find anything concrete about this, only rumors, hints, and people kind of beating around the bush, but from what I've been able to ascertain is that the transfer of power may or may not have been mutual, and perhaps there were some differences of opinion as to what the company should look like going forward. Again, I can't say that for certain, but there's a lot of smoke In '85, DAW released their first hardcovers, and the style of books being released changed drastically as they focused on more of a Mercedes Lackey-style feminine fantasy. Tor and Baen Books, two science fiction and fantasy publishing houses inspired by DAW, overtook DAW at this time, both in sales and quality. The Yellow Spine King was dead. Long live the king. Now, to be fair, DAW is still around. They were purchased by Astra in 2022 and kept Betsy Wollheim on as a publisher. For all I know, they still may be delivering quality books, though modern science fiction and fantasy is emphatically not my cup of polcho. Deuce Richardson over at DMR summed it up quite nicely, I think. For about 15 years, under Wollheim's firm guidance, there was an SFF golden age at DAW Books that may never be equaled. During that period, genre fans knew to look for those yellow DAW spines. More often than not, the book was worth the money. The only problem I have with DAW is that there are nearly 600 yellow spines out there, and I want them. Algis Budry's bookshelf column in Galaxy magazine would give awards under the criteria, a book should be good, a bird should fly. Well, he gave Donald Wollheim the Bookshelf Award for, quote, doing your job. It seems almost backhanded, but when your job was bringing the world new, quality science fiction and fantasy, then could we ask for anything more?